A few years ago, buying a new motorcycle meant one thing: you were getting the best version of that machine. Now, that assumption doesn't hold as cleanly. 2026 bikes are more advanced than ever. But that advancement comes with trade-offs riders are only starting to understand. Today, we're breaking down how digital tech is quietly reshaping ownership, why it's already affecting resale, and what most riders won't realize until it's too late. So stay with me, because the last part is where this really hits home. The upgrade everyone trusted. New motorcycles were getting smarter, safer, more refined for years. That was the story told across showrooms, brochures, and late-night conversations between riders comparing what had changed. Technology wasn't presented as a risk. It was framed as the natural next step, the same way fuel injection once replaced carburetors without much resistance. Riders had seen progress before, and most expected this to follow the same path. Walk into any dealership around 2024 or 2025, and the language sounded consistent. Better ride control, improved stability, smarter systems that could react faster than any human ever could. It didn't feel like something was being taken away. It felt like something was being added. That distinction mattered, because when something is introduced as an upgrade, few people stop to ask what might be traded in the process. There was also trust built over decades. Machines had always evolved, but they still answered directly to the rider. Twist the throttle, feel the response, tap the brake, sense the weight shift. That relationship stayed intact through generations of change. So, when digital systems began appearing more prominently, most riders treated them the same way they treated any new component. Another layer, not a replacement. It helped that nothing looked dramatically different on the surface. The bikes still carried familiar shapes, familiar sounds, familiar weight beneath the seat. Touring riders still loaded them for long miles. Weekend riders still rolled out for short runs. Everything felt recognizable. And when something feels familiar, it's easy to assume the fundamentals haven't changed. No one stood in a showroom thinking they were giving anything up. There was no warning label suggesting a shift in control. No sign that ownership might mean something slightly different than it once did. The conversation stayed focused on comfort, convenience, and capability. And because of that, resistance never had a reason to form. That quiet acceptance set the stage for something most didn't notice until later. The first signs. Something changed. At first, nothing seemed wrong. The bikes started, ran, and rode exactly as expected. Miles went by without incident, and the experience still felt solid. But over time, small details began to stand out. Not failures, not breakdowns, just moments that didn't quite line up with how things used to behave. A rider might notice a setting that used to stay put suddenly resetting after a routine update. Another might find that a familiar response felt slightly delayed or adjusted in a way that didn't match instinct. These weren't dramatic shifts. They were subtle enough to question, easy enough to dismiss. Most chalked it up to getting used to something new. Dealers sometimes had answers, but those answers felt incomplete. A software refresh here, a system recalibration there. Explanations that sounded technical, but didn't fully explain why something had changed in the first place. It wasn't that anyone was hiding information, it was that the information never felt entirely clear. Riders began noticing small inconsistencies. Not complaints, just observations. A bike felt different after service, a feature responded differently. Each example seemed minor alone, but together suggested something shifting underneath. There was no clear moment or turning point. The change came gradually, almost invisible, building in small increments, until it became noticeable over time. And once enough of those moments stacked together, a different kind of question started forming. If this is starting to feel familiar, take a second to like the video, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. Riders everywhere are noticing the same shift, and your perspective matters more than ever as this story keeps unfolding across the industry. When the machine stops feeling mechanical. There was a time when every input had a direct path. Throttle cables pulled, fuel flowed, engines responded. Even as systems improved, that physical connection stayed intact. It gave riders a sense of certainty. You knew what the machine would do because you could feel how it worked. That feeling began to shift, not all at once, and not in a way that immediately stood out. But gradually, the connection between input and response felt less direct. Commands still worked, but something sat in between, a layer that interpreted, adjusted, and sometimes altered what the rider intended. It didn't mean the bike stopped performing. In many cases, performance improved on paper. Smoother transitions, more controlled responses, better handling in certain conditions. But the sensation changed. The machine no longer felt like it was simply responding. It felt like it was deciding. Older touring bikes felt honest. Every action traced back to something mechanical, visible, predictable, and easy to understand. That built confidence over time. Newer machines didn't lose reliability, but they lost clarity. Behavior became harder to read, and cause and effect felt less direct. No one announced the change. It arrived quietly, settling in as riders adjusted, often without realizing how much the relationship had shifted beneath them. That subtle change in feel led directly into something more personal. The moment it doesn't feel like yours. It usually happens in a moment that doesn't seem important at first. A feature that worked one way yesterday behaves differently today. A setting that used to stay locked in suddenly needs to be reconfigured. Something small, something easy to overlook, until it isn't. There's no warning when it happens, no clear message explaining what changed or why. The bike still runs, still moves, still does everything it's supposed to do. But a piece of familiarity is gone, not broken, just altered enough to feel unfamiliar. A rider might pull over and run through the usual checks. Controls, settings, adjustments, everything looks right. Nothing appears out of place. And yet, the machine responds in a way that feels slightly out of sync with expectation. Not wrong, just different. That's when the realization settles in, quiet and hard to define. The bike still belongs to the rider. Nothing on paper has changed. Yet the interaction feels less direct. It doesn't stop the ride or ruin the experience, but awareness lingers beneath the surface. From then on, every ride carries a different weight, shaped by that question. Ownership isn't what it used to be. What used to be simple has quietly become layered. Buying a motorcycle once meant everything attached to it belonged to you, from the engine down to the smallest function it could perform. That understanding held steady for decades, shaping how riders approached both purchase and long-term ownership. The expectation was clear. If it was bolted to the frame, it was yours to use without restriction. That line has shifted without much announcement. Many of the features now built into newer motorcycles are no longer tied strictly to hardware. They exist within software systems that control how and when those features can be accessed. The physical component might be present, installed and ready, but its full function depends on permissions rather than possession. It introduces a distinction that didn't exist before. This doesn't show up as a missing part. Everything is there, visible and intact. The difference sits in how the machine allows that part to operate. A feature might be active one moment and limited the next, not because anything changed physically, but because the system governing it adjusted access. That shift separates ownership into layers. There's what sits in front of you, and then there's what you're allowed to use. Over time, that layered structure changes expectations. Ownership becomes less about having something outright and more about maintaining access to it. The rider still holds the keys, still rides the same roads. But control is filtered through a system that decides how much of the machine is available at any given moment. It's not presented as a restriction, it's presented as functionality. That difference, subtle as it is, leads directly into a deeper change in how these machines are maintained. Fixing things isn't straightforward anymore. There was a time when diagnosing a problem started with listening, looking, and working through the machine step by step. A rider or a trusted mechanic could trace an issue using tools that were widely available and methods that were well understood. The process was hands-on, direct, and grounded in mechanical logic. That process has become more complex. Many modern motorcycles rely on diagnostic systems that require specific access tools to interpret what's happening internally. The information still exists, but it's not always visible without the proper interface. What used to be identified through physical inspection now often depends on digital interpretation. Parts themselves have also changed in how they interact with the machine. Replacing a component is no longer always a matter of fitting it correctly and tightening it into place. In some cases, the system needs to recognize that part before it functions as intended. The physical installation becomes only one step in a larger process. Without that recognition, the part may not operate as expected. This doesn't prevent repair. The work still gets done, and skilled mechanics continue adapting to new systems. But the path to that repair includes steps that didn't exist before. Access becomes part of the equation, not just knowledge. Tools are no longer just physical instruments. They are gateways into how the machine communicates with itself. As that process grows more layered, the impact doesn't stop at the workbench. Costs start moving in the background. At first glance, nothing appears dramatically different in terms of price. There's no single fee that signals a major shift. No sudden jump that draws immediate attention. The cost of owning and maintaining a motorcycle still seems familiar on the surface. But underneath that surface, smaller changes begin to accumulate. Each additional layer in how these machines operate introduces its own set of requirements. Access to certain systems, updates that maintain compatibility, and the time needed to work through more. Complex processes all contribute to the overall cost. None of these changes are large enough on their own to stand out. They are incremental, spreading across different parts of ownership. Shops feel these changes first. The time required for certain services increases, even if the task itself hasn't changed in a mechanical sense. That added time doesn't come from the physical work alone, but from the steps needed to navigate the system surrounding it. Over time, those adjustments influence how services are priced. For the rider, the effect shows up gradually. A service that once took a certain amount of time now takes longer. A routine check involves more steps than before. The difference isn't always explained in detail, but it's felt, not as a single expense, but as a pattern that becomes clearer over multiple visits. As those patterns settle into place, another layer begins forming, one that extends beyond maintenance entirely. Riding behavior becomes measurable. Modern motorcycles are capable of observing more than just their own performance. The systems built into them can register patterns in how the machine is used, capturing details that go beyond basic operation. Inputs such as acceleration, braking, and consistency of movement can be recorded and interpreted over time. This information doesn't sit idle. It forms a record of how the motorcycle is ridden, not just how it functions. The distinction is subtle but important. Instead of focusing solely on the condition of the machine, the system begins to reflect the behavior of the person operating it. Each ride contributes to that record, adding another layer to what is known. The structure of this observation is not always visible during the ride itself. The motorcycle continues to perform as expected, responding to inputs in real time. The recording happens quietly in the background, without interrupting the experience. That lack of interruption makes it easy to overlook. Over time, however, the existence of that record changes how the machine is understood. It is no longer just a tool that responds to commands. It becomes something that can also reflect patterns of use, storing information that extends beyond the immediate moment. The ride still feels the same on the surface. Yet, beneath that surface, something new has taken shape, one that connects directly to what comes next. Riding starts to feel different. At first, nothing changes in a way that can be pointed at directly. The bike still moves, still responds, still carries the same weight down the road. But over time, a subtle awareness begins to settle in. It's not tied to a warning light or a sudden malfunction. It's quieter than that, sitting somewhere between instinct and hesitation. Riding has always been about feel. The connection between throttle, road, and body came naturally, built over miles rather than instructions. That instinct doesn't disappear, but it begins to share space with something else. Second layer of thought that wasn't there before. Not strong enough to interrupt the ride, but present enough to be noticed. There are moments where decisions feel slightly delayed. Not because the rider doesn't know what to do, but because something in the back of the mind pauses before acting. It's not fear and it's not confusion. It's awareness. A sense that actions are no longer entirely private, even if nothing actively interferes. Most rides feel normal, especially on open highways where rhythm takes over. Yet in tighter moments, instinct gives way to hesitation. Nothing forces it, and no system intervenes. The shift comes from awareness alone. Once that awareness settles in, it stays. From then on, riding carries a different tone, extending beyond the road and into perception. The garage stops, feeling the same. The garage has always been more than just a place to store a bike. It's where riders learned their machines, where problems were solved, where ideas turned into modifications. That space carried a sense of freedom, built on the understanding that anything could be adjusted with enough time and effort. That sense begins to change, not because the garage disappears, but because what happens inside it becomes less certain. Modifications that once felt straightforward now carry an added layer of consideration. Not whether they can be done, but how they might interact with everything else built into the machine. Trial and error was once part of the process. Trying something new, adjusting it, refining it over time. That approach becomes less appealing when the outcome isn't always predictable. A change in one area might influence something else in a way that isn't immediately visible, making experimentation feel less controlled. Riders still work on their bikes, tools and knowledge remain, but the approach becomes cautious and measured. Curiosity gives way to restraint. Over time, the garage rhythm slows. Projects take longer or never begin. The space shifts from exploration to maintenance. Not from lost creativity, but a tighter environment. That change doesn't stay contained for long. If you want more straight, no-spin breakdowns like this, make sure you're subscribed. These changes aren't slowing down, and the next ones will matter even more. Stay ahead of what's coming, before it becomes normal and impossible to question. The local shop dynamic changes. For decades, local shops played a central role in keeping bikes on the road. They weren't just service points. They were places where experience lived, where riders brought problems that didn't always have clear answers. The value of those shops came from the people inside them, not just the tools on the wall. That dynamic begins to shift as the machines themselves change. Shops still operate, still service bikes, still handle everything from routine maintenance to unexpected issues. But the way they interact with those machines evolves. Access becomes part of the equation, not just skill. Some shops adapt, finding ways to work within new systems while maintaining the quality they've always offered. Others take a step back from certain types of work, choosing to focus on what remains straightforward. The decision isn't about capability. It's about how much the process has changed. Riders begin noticing subtle changes. Services once handled in-house now require outside coordination, extending turnaround times through added process complexity. The rider-shop relationship remains, but feels less direct and more structured. Trust still exists, yet no longer stands alone. As that relationship shifts, its effects begin appearing in other areas of ownership and experience. Why new bikes lose their edge in the market. When it comes time to buy or sell, perception plays a bigger role than any single feature. Riders look at a machine and try to understand not just what it is, but what it will be like to live with over time. That evaluation has started to shift in ways that weren't as common before. Newer motorcycles still offer impressive performance, refined handling, and advanced capability. On paper, they represent progress in nearly every measurable way. But for many riders, that isn't the only factor that matters. Predictability, familiarity, and long-term manageability carry just as much weight. Older bikes, especially those from earlier generations, begin to stand out in a different way. Not because they outperform newer models, but because they feel easier to understand. What you see is what you get. The relationship between rider and machine is clearer, more direct, less layered. Clarity begins shaping value. Newer bikes offer more features, but bring more unknowns, pushing buyers to weigh long-term behavior and ownership experience more carefully. Over time, their advantage narrows, not from decline, but shifting expectations. That perception change closes the gap between old and new, revealing a broader pattern that extends beyond any single purchase decision. This was rolled out where it was easiest. Large changes rarely begin where resistance is strongest. They tend to appear first in places where structure is loose, coordination is limited, and opposition is unlikely to organize quickly. Motorcycles fit that description in ways that are easy to overlook. The market is broad but divided, spread across brands, styles, and riding habits that don't always overlap. That fragmentation creates a unique environment. Riders may share the road, but they don't always move as a single group when it comes to policy or industry shifts. Touring riders, sport riders, weekend riders, and long-distance veterans all approach machines differently. That diversity makes unified pushback harder to build, especially when changes arrive gradually rather than all at once. From a structural standpoint, motorcycles also present fewer layers of complexity than larger vehicle categories. Fewer components, simpler, integration with external systems, and lower overall data volume per unit create a controlled environment for introducing new frameworks. It allows adjustments to be tested, refined, and stabilized without drawing widespread attention. History supports this pattern. Motorcycles often absorb regulatory changes earlier than other segments, setting expectations and easing future shifts. What seems like coincidence reveals sequencing. Start where resistance is scattered. Refine quietly, then let it settle before wider attention follows. Once that pattern becomes clear, it raises a deeper question about why this structure was built this way. The business model quietly changed. For most of motorcycling history, the transaction was straightforward. A rider purchased a machine, maintained it, and used it as long as it remained reliable. Revenue for manufacturers came primarily from the initial sale, and the parts needed to keep that machine running over time. The relationship was defined by that exchange. That model has gradually shifted. Instead of relying solely on the moment of purchase, value now extends beyond the initial transaction. Systems embedded within the motorcycle create opportunities for ongoing interaction, where access, updates, and functionality can be adjusted throughout the life of the machine. The product becomes part of a longer cycle rather than a single event. This shift introduces a different kind of consistency for manufacturers. Revenue is no longer tied only to how many bikes are sold in a given year. It becomes connected to how those bikes continue to operate after they leave the showroom. Access can be maintained, expanded, or adjusted over time, creating a structure that extends far beyond the first handshake. From a business perspective, this creates stability beyond sales cycles. The rider relationship continues through ongoing interactions, tying machine and system together. The bike becomes part of a managed experience. Small, consistent adjustments reshape the system, blurring ownership and access. That structural shift explains why these changes keep moving forward without interruption or resistance over time. Once it's normal, it stops being questioned. When something is new, it draws attention. Questions are asked, Comparisons are made, and discussions take shape around whether the change is necessary or justified. That stage rarely lasts long. As soon as a system becomes familiar, the conversation begins to shift away from its existence and toward how it functions. This transition happens quietly. What once felt unusual becomes expected through repetition. Riders adapt to new processes. Dealers align their practices, and service routines adjust to match the updated framework. Over time, the change blends into the background, no longer standing out as something separate. Debate tends to follow the same pattern. Early questions focus on whether a system should exist at all. Later discussions move toward how to navigate it effectively. That shift reduces resistance without requiring agreement. The structure remains in place, and attention moves on to other concerns. Fragmentation plays a role. Without a unified response, perspectives stay isolated while the system continues unchanged. That absence of coordination lets normalization settle quickly. What once felt like change becomes standard, no longer questioned. The framework stabilizes not through full acceptance, but routine. And once routine takes hold, the broader implications begin to reveal themselves more clearly over time. The line that moved without a moment. There was never a single point where everything changed. No announcement that marked the shift, no clear boundary separating what came before from what exists now. Instead, the transition unfolded gradually, shaped by small adjustments that accumulated over time. Ownership still exists in the same formal sense. Titles are issued, registrations are renewed, and the process of acquiring a motorcycle remains familiar. On paper, nothing fundamental has been removed. The structure of ownership remains intact, supported by the same documentation and procedures that have always defined it. What has changed is the experience within that structure. Control, once assumed to be complete, now operates within a set of conditions that didn't previously exist. Those conditions are not always visible, but they influence how the machine behaves and how it is used. The relationship between rider and motorcycle has been adjusted without being formally redefined. That adjustment never feels abrupt. It doesn't interrupt riding or stop the machine from doing its job. Instead, it quietly reshapes the context around it, subtle enough to notice only when, compared to what once felt certain. Over time, it becomes normal. Riders still ride, roads stay the same, but ownership shifts. Nothing vanished at once. The line simply moved, leaving something familiar that no longer feels quite the same. It didn't happen all at once. No warning, no clear moment, just small changes stacking up until the experience felt different. The bike still runs, still pulls, still looks the part. But ownership isn't as simple as it used to be. And the market is starting to reflect that in ways most riders haven't fully processed yet. If you've felt this shift, or you've seen it play out with your own bike, let it be heard. Your perspective matters more than ever right now. And if you want more straight, no-spin breakdowns like this, make sure you like the video and subscribe, because what's coming next in this space won't stay quiet for long.